Episode 27, Missouri Nearly Folds. Welcome back to Hidden and Distorted History of the Church, where we uncover the lesser-known truths about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons. My goal is to reveal the authentic, historical facts behind the Mormon Church. Recap. Last time we exposed how Joseph Smith's so-called Word of Wisdom revelation was less divine inspiration and more a convenient nod to the Temperance Society, conveniently timed with the forced closure of distilleries in Kirtland and Mentor. We uncovered the undeniable plagiarism in the Joseph Smith translation, with Smith and Rigdon lifting directly from Adam Clarke's commentary. And let's not forget the scandal of Oliver Cowdery's alleged affair and Smith's controversial marriage to Fanny Alger. This week, we're pulling back the curtain on the truth behind the 1833 Missouri Expulsion and revisiting damning testimonies against the Smith family and their closest associates. The facts speak for themselves, so buckle up. Part 1. The Truth Behind the Missouri Expulsion. In June 1832, Phelps, a prominent Mormon convert and former New York editor, arrived in Independence, Missouri to establish a printing press. He quickly set up the Evening and the Morning Star, a Mormon newspaper that became a lightning rod for local tensions. Independence resident Josiah Gregg vividly recalled, in proportion as the Mormons grew strong in numbers, they also became more exacting and bold in their pretensions. In a little paper printed at Independence under their immediate auspices, everything was said that could provoke hostility between saints and their worldly neighbors, until at last they became so emboldened by impunity as openly to boast of their determination to be the sole proprietors of the land of Zion. The boldness of these claims incensed the local population and set the stage for violent confrontations. In July 1833, along with the newspaper, Phelps's press published the first edition of the Book of Commandments, a collection of Joseph Smith's revelations. However, tensions were already at a breaking point, and the timing of this publication added fuel to the fire. The July 1833 edition of the Evening and the Morning Star only fanned the flames. A particular article, while urging Mormons to purchase land lawfully in Jackson County, drew a dangerous comparison to ancient Israel's conquest of the Holy Land. It warned Mormons that while Israel had to obtain the Holy Land by the sword, the land in Jackson was to be secured through legal means. The article further stated, "To suppose that we can come up here and take possession of this land by the shedding of blood would be setting at naught the law of the glorious gospel." This reference to bloodshed, even in a cautionary context, was enough to spark fear and outrage among the Missourians, who saw it as a thinly veiled threat. As the situation deteriorated, residents of Jackson County convened a public meeting on July 20th, 1833, to address the Mormon problem. The meeting produced a scathing address, accusing the Mormons of being no better than slaves in terms of property and education, and of having a corrupting influence on our slaves. The locals were convinced that the Mormons sought to seize their lands by force. The address boldly declared, "We are daily told that we of this county are to be cut off, and our lands appropriated by them for inheritances." It warned of an imminent Mormon takeover, asserting that it requires no gift of prophecy to tell that the day is not far distant when the civil government of the country will be in their hands. The ultimatum was clear. Mormons were to cease settling in the county, leave immediately, and halt their newspaper. Failure to comply would result in severe consequences. When Mormon leaders asked for more time to respond to these demands, the locals took matters into their own hands. On July 20th, a mob attacked the printing office of the Evening and the Morning Star, destroying the press and physically assaulting 2 Mormon leaders who were tarred and feathered. The destruction of the press also halted the production of the Book of Commandments. Only a few copies survived, saved by Mormon women who risked their safety to rescue loose pages from the wreckage, which later became invaluable to Mormon history. The violence escalated 3 days later when the mob gathered again and rounded up 6 high-ranking Mormon priests, extracting a promise that half of the Mormon population would leave the county by January 1834 and the remainder by April. In exchange, the mob promised to prevent any further violence, so long as the Mormons adhered to the agreement. One of the most incendiary pieces published by the newspaper was titled "Free People of Color." It urged compliance with Missouri state law, which required free black people to carry proof of citizenship. The Missourians, already on edge, interpreted this as evidence of the Mormons inviting free blacks into the state, an idea deeply threatening in the newly formed slave state. Though the Evening and the Morning Star issued an extra publication to deny this claim, asserting that the intent had been to deter such migration, the damage was done. By 1833, roughly 1,200 Mormons had settled in Jackson County, comprising a third to half of the county's population. The rapid Mormon influx stoked fears of cultural displacement and economic competition, as well as religious and political differences that the Missourians found intolerable. The Mormons, who followed Joseph Smith's vision of building a new Zion, had grand plans for the area, including a comprehensive city plan devised by Smith in 1833. This plan envisioned a grid of streets and blocks, at the center of which would stand 24 Mormon temples, an audacious proposition in the eyes of their neighbors. In the aftermath of the violence, the non-Mormon residents refused to allow the Mormons to return to their homes, and no compensation was offered for the destruction of property. In 1834, the Mormons mounted a desperate attempt to return to Jackson County through a quasi-military expedition known as Zion's Camp, which we will cover later on. The expedition, organized from Kirtland, Ohio, aimed to re-establish Mormon presence in Jackson, but ultimately disbanded when the anticipated support from the Missouri governor failed to materialize. This failed attempt further cemented the Mormons' precarious position in Missouri, setting the stage for future conflicts, the Missouri-Mormon Wars. Despite their claims of divine mandate, their increasing numbers, bold declarations, and aggressive expansion plans alienated their non-Mormon neighbors, leading to a series of violent episodes that would characterize their tumultuous early years in the region. Part 2, Mormonism Unveiled, coming, exposing the Golden Con. The publication of Mormonism Unveiled in 1834 marks a pivotal moment in early Mormon history, as it is widely regarded as the first anti-Mormon book, providing a foundation for future critiques of Joseph Smith and the early Latter-day Saint movement. This book not only represented a significant opposition to Mormonism, but also provided a direct challenge by addressing the contents of the Book of Mormon itself, something few opponents had attempted up to that point. Two key contributions from Mormonism Unveiled have had a lasting impact on the understanding of early Mormonism. The first was the inclusion of a series of affidavits and statements related to the character of Joseph Smith and other early Mormon leaders, including Martin Harris. These testimonies aimed to portray Smith and his associates as morally dubious and deeply involved in questionable practices, such as treasure-seeking. The second major component was the introduction of the Spalding-Rigdon theory of Book of Mormon authorship, which proposed that the Book of Mormon was not divinely inspired, but rather based on an earlier manuscript by Solomon Spalding. E.D. Howe, the author, prefaced the affidavits section with the following declaration. We next present to the reader a few, among the many dispositions which have been obtained from the neighborhood of the Smith family, and the scene where the far-famed Gold Bible had its pretended origin. The affidavits presented in Mormonism Unveiled were collected by Dr. Philastus Hurlbut in 1833, an excommunicated member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. These affidavits, which depicted the Smith family as destitute of moral character, are not known to exist outside of their printing in Howe's book. Their purpose was clear: to discredit Joseph Smith by emphasizing his family's treasure-seeking activities, casting a shadow on his prophetic claims. Ironically, some of the individuals providing these testimonies admitted to their own involvement in treasure-seeking, further complicating the moral narrative they sought to establish. Hurlbut's involvement adds an additional layer of intrigue. He had been excommunicated from the church on charges of immorality. One contemporary, Benjamin Winchester, recounted that Hurlbut was previously expelled from a Methodist congregation for unvirtuous conduct with a young lady. Hurlbut's behavior was claimed to have persisted after joining the Mormon Church, as Winchester described, leading to his eventual expulsion. Winchester held a biased view at that point, as he had been deeply involved in the early Mormon movement and held several prominent positions, including being the youngest adult member of Zion's Camp, a member of the First Quorum of the 70, and president of a large branch in Philadelphia. His later rejection of Mormonism and disagreements with church leadership led to his eventual departure from the faith in 1844. What is striking is how the LDS Church's narrative around Winchester shifts depending on the source. According to one account on the Brigham Young Center's website, Winchester was excommunicated. Yet another BYU source claims he simply left the church, avoiding the deeper reasons for his departure. This selective history highlights the tendency to sanitize controversial elements within Mormonism's past. Winchester's reasons for leaving were eventually laid bare in an 1889 statement, which provides a detailed critique of the evolving doctrines of the church, particularly polygamy and the introduction of Freemasonry into Mormon practice. Let's cut to the chase. Hurlbut's collected affidavits were a direct assault on the credibility of Joseph Smith and his family, shaking the very foundation of early Mormonism. These affidavits were explosive, casting a harsh light on the Smith family's reputation in Palmyra. Dan Vogel places the collection of 45 affidavits in the spring of 1833, a crucial moment when Hurlbut was in full force, gathering damaging testimony from neighbors who had known the Smiths personally. Vogel's extensive work has made these affidavits available on archive.org, but unfortunately, due to the site being down, thanks to a DDoS attack as I searched, I couldn't verify them firsthand at the moment. However, I did manage to locate 2 sets of affidavits from later in 1833 that are just as revealing. One set is from November 3rd with 11 signatories, and another larger set of 51 people signed on December 4th, making a staggering total of 62 individuals denouncing the Smith family. This level of testimony wasn't just coincidental. It was a tidal wave of condemnation that Howe compiled and published in Mormonism Unveiled, further discrediting the Smith family and their so-called Gold Bible origins. The testimony of 11 Smith acquaintances. 11 Smith acquaintances, November 3rd, 1833. We, the undersigned, being personally acquainted with the family of Joseph Smith Sr., with whom the celebrated Gold Bible so-called originated, state that they were not only a lazy, indolent set of men, but also intemperate, and their word was not to be depended upon, and that we are truly glad to dispense with their society. The testimony of 51 Smith neighbors. 51 named Smith neighbors, December 4th, 1833. We, the undersigned, have been acquainted with the Smith family for a number of years while they resided near this place, and we have no hesitation in saying that we consider them destitute of that moral character which ought to entitle them to the confidence of any community. They were particularly famous for visionary projects, spent much of their time digging for money, which they pretended was hidden in the earth. To this day, large excavations may be seen not far from their residence, where they used to spend their time digging for hidden treasures. Joseph Smith, Sr., and his son Joseph were in particular considered entirely destitute of moral character and addicted to vicious habits. And in reference to all with whom we were acquainted that have embraced Mormonism from this neighborhood, we are compelled to say were very visionary, and most of them destitute of moral character and without influence in this community. This may explain why they were permitted to go on with their impositions undisturbed. It was not supposed that any of them were possessed of sufficient character or influence to make anyone believe their book or their sentiments. And we know not of a single individual in this vicinity that puts the least confidence in their pretended revelations. Now, let's be clear. Hurlbut's mission wasn't just casual character assassination. It was a meticulously organized effort to dismantle Joseph Smith's claims. These affidavits weren't coming from strangers. They were coming from people who had lived side by side with the Smiths, and their testimonies were damning. The affidavits laid bare a picture of the Smith family as treasure diggers, con artists, and individuals of questionable morals. The fact that the church still stands despite these early accusations speaks to the power of faith, or the power of how history gets rewritten by those in control. And here's where things get even more intriguing. Could these November and December affidavits be part of the same collection that Hurlbut began in the spring of 1833? It seems highly likely, as Mormonism Unveiled was released the November 1833, but without Vogel's direct confirmation, we can only speculate. That said, the content of these affidavits is consistent with the earlier reports. If Dan Vogel is watching, a confirmation on whether these fall affidavits are the same as the ones he posted for the spring of 1833 would be invaluable. Either way, the sheer volume of testimony in such a short span of time reveals just how widespread the opposition to Joseph Smith and his family was, even before Mormonism had fully taken root. In conclusion, the Missouri Expulsion of the Mormons in 1833 was not simply the result of religious differences, but a collision of cultural, political, and social tensions. W. W. Phelps' provocative publications, combined with the growing presence and bold assertions of the Mormon community, incited fear and hostility among the local residents. The destruction of their press and forced expulsion marked the violent culmination of these escalating tensions. Meanwhile, the release of Mormonism Unveiled in 1834 further fueled the fire, attacking the Smith family's reputation and the authenticity of Joseph Smith's revelations. Together, these events reveal the early fractures in Mormon history, as both internal and external pressures mounted against the fledgling movement. Please watch for future videos, and thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for the day.